Hi everyone, and welcome to the latest CTO Craft Bytes. Today we're enjoying a fireside chat with Jeannie Cordisco, Chief People Officer at O'Reilly. If this is your first time at CTO Craft Bytes, let me tell you a little bit more about this group. CTO Craft is a mentoring and coaching community for technology leaders around the world, focusing on supporting technologists in their leadership growth. Community numbers are over 8,000, big number, and CTO Craft provides them with one-on-one coaching, mentoring groups, a curated Slack community, and events like this one. If you're not a member of CTO Craft community and are interested in becoming one, you can, and you'd like to get updates on these events on emails, I can just post some links into the chat now for you to be able to do that. And it's too big for me to do, so I'm going to do that shortly in a moment for you guys. So essentially, yeah, huge thanks to our CTO Craft sponsors and our partners for helping making these Bytes events possible. Partners like AWS, Google Cloud, O'Reilly, and Pentalog, amongst others. CTO Craft memberships gives you access to some unique benefits of some of these partners. So click the link in the chat, which I'm about to post up in a second, to find out more. Thank you to O'Reilly for sponsoring this particular event. So O'Reilly gives your teams on-demand access to live events, in-depth courses, interactive coding environments, certification prep materials, instant answers to tough tech problems, and a vast collection of titles and videos from O'Reilly and nearly 200 other publishers. So, I'm Glyn Roberts, I'm CTO of Digital Solutions at iTechArt, and I'm the moderator for today's session. Joining me today is Jeannie Cordisco, Chief People Officer at O'Reilly. So, Jeannie, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Sure. Thanks, Glenn. I appreciate the introduction. And everyone, I'm so happy to be here with you today. This was an event that I've been looking forward to for so long when we first got into the planning stages. And it's about a topic that I'm extremely passionate about. And so I hope that you can feel the passion as I talk through what our topic is today. But before we even get there, a little bit of background about me. I've been at O'Reilly for about a year now. I joined O'Reilly as the Chief People Officer and as the first Chief People Officer. And I think it was a real, in that moment, sort of as a real inflection sort of moment for O'Reilly and thinking about how we continue to grow. We've been on a very, very fast growth trajectory. And, people are obviously a company's most important asset. And I think the signal of hiring a Chief People Officer was a real testament to how people first our organization is. And so I've had a really wild and wonderful first year here and so excited to continue to take O'Reilly to sort of the next levels and hoping all of you will get involved with us as well. Prior to O'Reilly, I was at Fannie Mae. For those of you who are across the pond, Fannie Mae is a U.S. national organization, but our biggest mortgage company. And I was their deputy head of HR for a certain business function there, their finance and audit functions. Prior to Fannie Mae, I was at Under Armour. I'm hoping that you all know what Under Armour is. It's the sports apparel organization that rivals Adidas and Nike. And I was the head of HR for North America there. It was a really wonderful opportunity as I joined O'Reilly in a Chief People Officer position to sort of culminate all of the experience that I've had. I started my career out in sales and had a very non-traditional path into HR. And I've really, in my time, sort of taken different steps in terms of being a people leader and then being an individual contributor and then sort of learning a craft and becoming a people leader again. And what I have found in all of my experience is that if you can bring empathy to whatever situation you are ultimately facing, but especially as a leader, it is far more effective in the way that your direct reports respond and thrive under your leadership. So really excited to talk to you about sort of my thoughts on empathetic leadership today and appreciate you having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. It's definitely an interesting topic I haven't seen come up before inside the CTO Craft community. So it's great to obviously be the person chatting to you about this.
Yeah.
So for the audience, if, you can ask your questions at any time from the Ask a Question link just below the video in the chat box. And yeah, let's kick off then. So before we focus completely on empathy, what are your views of the different types of leaders that you see or exist right now?
I think that's so important to set the context around the empathetic leader specifically. Really because when we think about leaders or managers, and I actually think there is a little bit of a distinction there. And so I empower all of you to, as we go through the list of leaders I'm about to talk about, try to identify where you might fall in. I don't know that there's a one size fits all sort of method here, or that each of us has our own soft skills. So I think you'll probably fall into a couple of different categories. But as I go through them, I think always keep in the back of your mind that the way in which you manage, there's a leadership philosophy and there's a management philosophy. Leadership philosophy is something that we can talk about later as we actually think about empathy. But a management style is really what influences how a manager leads and interacts with their team. There can be managers who are empathetic or completely detached. There can be hands-on managers and hands-off managers. There could be flexible managers or those who manage by the book. I think what the crux of all of this is that management styles impact how managers make decisions, how they assign projects to direct reports or delegate work, how they communicate with their employees, how they track progress, and how they encourage growth. We're all complex and dynamic as humans. I know that best as leading a human function. And so, as I said, I don't know that you'll find that you fit perfectly in each of these prescribed management styles, but still considering all of them can help us learn how to work better together and also how to think about managing your team most effectively. And I'm going to go through the list super quick when we start to think about the different types of leaders. So micromanager, we've all known them. Maybe we've been one at a particular time in our career. Probably not the best management style, but necessary when performance is low. Micromanagers tend to be more focused on the task than the person completing the task. And so they get very maniacal about ensuring that things get taken care of in sort of a very step-by-step way, and tend to disconnect from the bigger picture. There's the absent manager. So micromanagers are way too hands-on in some instances. Absent managers are the completely opposite approach, where they're just not around. And it really helps or makes employees feel abandoned and quite frankly confused. There's a democratic manager. Democratic managers treat their employees like their constituents. So everybody has a fair vote, and it is the manager's job to make decisions based on their direct reports' input, and they won't make a decision until all of their direct reports give input. There's an autocratic manager, a little bit opposite to the democratic manager, where it is a true my way or the highway approach. They tend not to consult with their team before making decisions. And what this means is that they might move faster than the other types of leaders in terms of the decision making, but they tend to leave their team behind when they're moving that fast. And it never really leads to the best results. There is one that I hope nobody can attribute themselves to here, called the deceptive manager. And this is one in which they tell their employees one story, but their boss another. There is absolutely no easier way to lose trust as a manager. Two more. Agile manager. So when you think about the agility of an organization and the change that organizations go through as they evolve, the agile manager is actually able to adapt to that change and lead through that change in a really effective way. It might mean a change in an industry, the change in the company, the change in a team dynamic, but the leader themselves is the leader of that change, the champion of that change, and gets people rallied around them. And then the last but not least, but the one that I think is most important as we talk about it today, is the empathetic leader. Empathetic leaders focus on employees as much as, or maybe even more so, than themselves. They also focus on them more than the strategy and the execution of that strategy. It means that there's an understanding that when outside of work things affect inside of work things, encouraging direct reports to reach their full potential still remains the most important aspect to that leader. And they want to support the employee with their outside of work things to help them reach their maximum potential for the inside of work things.
Okay, great. Yeah, there's several categories there. I always try and categorize things into like 3 categories, but I never seem to do it effectively. So at least I think what you like 7 or 8 then, weren't you? So I think
yes. Well, there are a lot of different types of managers out there, and I think it's really important for us to set the context because And there are many, many more than that. But I think when you actually look at the way humans interact, those 7 are the 7 most sort of common types of managers. And oftentimes people will say empathetic leaders are the best. Not necessarily, but I think they are the most effective when you look at all 7 of those management styles and the commonalities or differences between each of them. So
great. Okay, then. So let's focus on the empathy aspect then. So what is empathy and what is empathetic leadership?
Sure. So this is this to me feels like it's one of the key traits that leaders practice. So empathy, we'll get to the definition that I believe it is ultimately, but it is one of the key traits that leaders practice and strengthen in order to become exceptional. So if you can implement or infuse empathy into your leadership style, regardless of what your leadership style is, you will be an exceptional leader. Because empathy is the ability to feel what another person is feeling. It is the ability to put yourself in another person's shoes in a really meaningful way. And it's really to experience their emotions. Now, empathy is not easy. It requires a tremendous amount of vulnerability to really listen to folks without judgment and to see yourself in other people's struggles. It can be really uncomfortable. There have been moments where I've tried to sort of employ empathy and it has felt very, very uncomfortable for me. And typically that discomfort comes from when you're supporting somebody in a really challenging time. And trying to associate yourself in that particular instance, sometimes you just can't relate. And so there are ways in which we'll talk about how you can be empathetic without having actually gone through that same situation. What empathy does, though, is that it creates connection and understanding. Sympathy, which is oftentimes thought of in tandem with empathy, is very different because sympathy, on the other hand, is more of a feeling of pity for another person. So there are times when sympathy is completely appropriate. But one of the main differences between empathy and sympathy is that empathy is an appropriate emotion at any time. Sympathy typically is saved for times in which somebody is going through a very, very sad or challenging time that in that moment, you probably shouldn't put yourself in their shoes and really just help them get through that moment emotionally.
Okay, so what role does empathy actually play in leadership? So what you're talking about difficult times, should you only really be an empathetic leader when you're firing someone?
No, you certainly want to use it during that time, but it does play into leadership in a really important way. So we live in an era filled with information. And without emotions or the ability to sense or understand and respond to those emotions, any level of understanding connection is impossible. So we just can't connect with people unless we can find our connection to them. And in today's business world, we have tools and methods for the efficient exchange of information. But what that does, especially in the world post-pandemic, where many of us are virtual, O'Reilly is a fully virtual organization, and that was new to me. New to me, obviously, pre-pandemic. It was a bit of a post-pandemic decision that we made. We had a lot of people who were virtual pre-pandemic, but if we were unable to use empathy in the way that we led or lead, it would leave out a massive amount of what makes people human, because what we do is so digital all the time, and we exchange information in digital ways. And so there is no human connection there. And so empathy, regardless of whether it's virtual or in person, is such an important piece to this in order to create that human connection. Research has shown that empathy is essential at work. And when it comes to remote work, as I've been saying, the critical need for both developing your emotional intelligence as a leader and expressing it in the form of empathy is imperative for your team's success. So when a workplace is capable of demonstrating this empathy, there are plenty of studies to show that it increases happiness, it increases productivity, and it really increases retention among employees. And those are all 3 things that are really important to ensuring that we have a really powerful sort of hire to retire experience for employees, but also that you get the most out of your employees' potential. When leaders and their people feel safe and seen, and appreciated, quite frankly, everybody's far more likely to be engaged and innovative. And innovation comes from that feeling of employee engagement, employee satisfaction. I have a leader who supports my sometimes crazy ideas. Leaders with empathy, in sort of the short form of all of this, number one, are able to understand their team members better and really are able to personalize coaching, personalize the way in which they motivate folks, inspire and lead them. Of course, for nothing better than excellent performance. Empathetic leaders are also able to address poor performance and lead their teams to bouncing back with greater productivity. So they address poor performance quickly, they address it in a human way, and it allows employees to understand, okay, this is what I really need to work on, and I'm going to be more productive because of that. Leaders with empathy also are able to anticipate how team members will behave and respond and perform based on changes in the business and the environment as a whole. And so when you pull all of that together, you have a very dynamic opportunity to get people to rally around a change or rally around innovation that takes the company to a different level. Obviously, building trust and better working relationships is really important. And then I think the most important is that employees feel empowered to express their ideas in a better way than that others can understand, because they have the freedom to come up with bad ideas or make a mistake and fail fast and pivot and be able to drive productivity, or at least drive better performance because your manager is supportive.
Sure. So you were talking mainly about why empathetic leadership is actually important there, and an interesting piece I picked up on especially was around the performance piece of a team, where a team, you could sort of say empathy is sort of an excuse you can give to someone for not penalising them for poor performance, but that's not the case because you still expect better performance by being an empathetic leader to them.
That's exactly right. I think an empathetic leader doesn't have to overtly say, I want better performance out of you. In all of the actions that an empathetic leader does in building trust and ensuring that they're understanding where that human is coming to work and any extenuating circumstances that they have that could be affecting the ways in which they're getting their work done at work, to understand that, to be able to put themselves in their shoes, to be able to create a human element of connection, to say, tell me about you individually and how I can help you, put myself in your shoes to help you drive sort of performance to reach your highest potential, is so powerful. But I don't know that empathetic leaders necessarily talk about performance as a thing that we're all ultimately striving for. I think performance comes from this cultivation of a really dynamic, safe environment for employees to feel a part of, that inevitably just creates really exemplary performance.
Okay, great. And beforehand, you mentioned to me there's actually 3 different types of empathy. So let's hear what those are.
Yeah, so there are 2 that are the most common types of empathy. And I don't want to get too scientific here. I certainly won't go into the whole diatribe of exactly why each of them is important. But the 2 that are most common are cognitive empathy and emotional empathy. Cognitive empathy is taking another person's perspective, imagining what it must be like in their shoes, and understanding somebody's feelings. So it's truly a way of, let me think about how I can really relate to this person by thinking about how they must feel in this moment. Emotional empathy is sharing an emotional experience. It's the actual feeling, physical change in the way that your emotions arise in response to somebody else's pain. And it's really experiencing, because of that emotional reaction, that willingness to help someone, like I wouldn't be able to live without myself unless I helped this person in this moment because I know they need it. So I think a really simple and maybe a little bit morbid example here, but I think it's good, is of cognitive versus emotional empathy is, imagine if someone were to come to work one day and say, my grandmother just died. We were really close, and they start to cry. A cognitive empathy response would be, I'm sorry, I know you're sad, and that what you're going through must be really hard. You're putting themselves in their shoes. You're not feeling sorry for them. You're actually saying, I know that how you are feeling must be really hard, or what you're going through must be really hard. Emotional empathy is, I'm sorry to hear about your grandmother. I know you miss her. I'm here for you. And maybe you start crying. Maybe it's such an emotional response that you've been there. You've experienced the loss of a loved one. And so therefore you share that response. That would be emotional empathy. Now, the combination of those two empathies, which I think is what we ultimately try to achieve as leaders, is compassionate empathy. And that refers to having sympathy or compassion for somebody else. So the emotional empathy piece, where you really experience their emotion, the cognitive piece, where you're putting yourselves in their shoes, and really sort of think about how you find a way to connect with not only the person, but also the circumstances or the challenges that that person is going through. So it's a combination of both that cognitive and emotional empathy. Some research lists that cognitive and emotional empathy are the two main types. But mostly when we talk about leadership, and if you do some reading around empathetic leadership, you'll find that compassionate empathy is the one that most researchers say leaders are, if they are effective at implementing empathy into the way in which they lead, that is the leading type of empathy that they lead with, because they're really attuned into understanding how to feel in somebody's shoes, but also how to really experience the emotion that the person is going through.
Okay, great. Are there any bad points about being empathetic? So, for example, do people take advantage? Going, every time I tell them something, she's a sucker, she believes everything, so I get away with murder.
I don't know that that's being empathetic, maybe. I think that's just being a soft leader. And I think there's a real distinction there. I don't know that being empathetic makes you soft. I mean, there are ways you still have to lead. You still have to drive performance. You might be an empathetic leader, but you could very quickly become a micromanager if somebody's not performing. I do it. I'm guilty of it. I'm not proud of it. But when I get frenzied and I feel like I'm not seeing results, I tend to really focus on the task to ensure that we're getting work done. I try to infuse empathy into that. But I don't know that being an empathetic leader makes you soft. So no, I don't know that there's a bad thing about being an empathetic leader. I think you just need to know what is empathy. And if in your mind, it means I'm going to be very kind, very forgiving, do what you want, and not holding people to a set of standards, I think you've got empathy wrong. And I think you're not, that is probably where, if that is your definition of empathy, it may bring out the bad points as a leader.
Great. We've got some questions coming in from the audience already. A couple of them already on my plan, but a great one from Mark, just to clarify something. So emotional empathy sounds very similar to sympathy. Is the only difference when you feel pity rather than, say, remorse?
I think emotional empathy, yes, there's certainly a level of sympathy there. But think about feeling sympathetic for somebody. You know they've gone through a loss. You feel really bad for them. You experience this level of pity. Man, I wish I could help them. Man, I feel really bad for them. But you kind of go on with your life. Like it's a moment. It's this sort of very finite moment where you feel that feeling, and then it's sort of like, okay, well, I'm going to continue on with my life. I think the difference is that emotional empathy is when you really dig deep, and that the person's feelings become your feelings. And so they're distraught over this, this loss of theirs. And again, I feel so bad. This is a very morbid example, but I feel like it was just a really good one to show sort of where somebody's emotions might be really high. They're distraught. You become distraught also because the emotions that they are feeling has dredged up a lot of emotions that you have felt in a very similar circumstance. And so therefore you can empathize with exactly what they are going through. So sympathy tends to bring up emotion, all that, but it tends to be around things that you just can't quite relate to or that you've never been through. And so therefore you can't actually share that emotion.
Okay, great. So how do you know if you're actually an empathetic leader? So I think probably everybody assumes they are. I definitely assume I am. I believe I listen to people and try and have empathy for them. how do I know if I'm actually right or I'm actually not very good on the empathy side, even though I'd assume everyone thinks that they are?
So what I love about empathy or empathetic leadership is that it's not a fixed trait. So there are many other ways in which, as I talked about those 7 leadership styles, or the 6, excluding the empathetic leader, the other 6, those tend to be very intrinsic attributes that we come to the table with as leaders. And so it's hard to retrain the way in which we react or manage. Empathy is something that you can learn. It and strategies, obviously, to help demonstrate sort of the understanding and the recognition and the empathy that you look for as a leader is, number one, you have to be authentic. There is just no other way to bring your whole self to work and expect that your team does exactly the same. You have to recognize that there are different perspectives. So everybody's perspective matters. I think that's what makes diversity such a beautiful thing, is that when you think about diversity in a holistic sense, regardless of how we are differentiated because of our the way in which we identify, what diversity brings, because of all of those different identifications, is a rich sort of melting pot of perspective and thought. And that is what, to me, really feels like it drives innovation, and it helps us think about things in a very different way that we otherwise might not have because of our lived experiences. You must withhold judgment. And this is a hard thing to do as human beings. We always tend to revert to, I don't know that I would have done that way, or yes, that's brilliant, or however, and that is judgment, good or bad. I think to be a very solid empathetic leader, judgment needs to go out the window, and you need to be a blank slate every single time. You need to be really self-aware and need to bring compassion to the way in which you lead. And I think the way you can do that is to ask a lot of questions. Let the other person talk. So listen 80% of the time. You really shouldn't be talking very much. And then reflect on what you're hearing from them. Say, if I hear you correctly, I think what you're trying to say is this. And in that way, you can put yourself in their shoes so much more effectively. And I think it goes without saying, but being understanding is the first step to all of this, is just trying to level the playing field by understanding what a person ultimately needs, and then how you can help them by understanding, by really feeling what they're feeling in order to bring change or help to the table.
Cool. So a great statement from Mark, which I've heard before as well, is I always say we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, use them in that proportion.
Amen. Amen.
And what was it? Ted Lasso, be inquisitive, not judgmental. So there's a few quotes out there that sort of line up around this topic quite nicely, I think.
I love it.
Cool. So essentially, just one from the audience, actually, which is still in line with this. In all these people interactions, do you actually have to be an extroverted person, or is empathy more about being interested, curious, and open to people?
It's exactly the latter. No, I don't think that extroversion or introversion plays into this at all. It's funny. I think in my older age, I feel like I must have been an extrovert. It feels like in a former life. It really was in the lifetime that I'm in right now. But I have steered so much more of being an introvert. And I think maybe the pandemic did that to me. I don't know. But I really, the energy that I find is from doing things that tangibly I can see results from, not so much gaining energy from those around me and people. I tend to go out to events these days, and I come home and I'm exhausted. And I think it's just because I'm out of practice, maybe number one, but also because I think I'm steering a little bit more towards introversion than extroversion. So no, I don't think extroversion plays into this at all. I think that's a personality trait, and be proud of however you identify with either being extroverted or introverted. This is more of sort of an intrinsic way to help think about being vulnerable and connecting with people on a very individual level. And I think introverts can do that just as effectively as extroverts. So.
Okay, great. So you were touching on a little bit there on how to actually put this into practice. So if you don't think you've actually got as good an empathetic leadership style at the moment, are there more actions you should be taking to actually put this into practice?
Yes. Yes, I think that hits the nail on the head, and that's exactly where we should spend some time. So really what we want to ensure when you think about being a leader, you should really strive to rise above your own point of view. I think that's a really big part of this, and take in the environment around you. So a couple of things that I think are imperative as you embark on your empathetic leadership journey is really show a genuine interest in your team's concerns. And you can do this in a one-on-one environment, but ask questions, be engaged in the conversation. You don't always need to have the answers or the solutions to every one of the challenges that the team faces. In fact, I actually think that that's a beautiful moment for the leader and their direct reports to come together and create a solution together. But the important piece is if there are challenges and there are worries, you need to make the effort to pay attention to why they are worried. So it's not so much what the worry itself actually is, but what is creating that worry, and connect with that to understand, to go the further sort of way to get the team rallied around coming up with a solution together. So show genuine interest. Second is listen actively and really respond thoughtfully. This goes back to, I think maybe Mark had made the comment, but active listening is your best friend. And it gives you an opportunity as people are speaking to really craft the response that you want to have. So these knee-jerk reactions tend to come with judgment, but they also tend to be sort of very we don't think them out. They tend to be what comes to our minds immediately, and they're not always the best way in which we react. And so I would acknowledge sort of the emotion behind your folks' words. And then as they are speaking, sort of think about some constructive advancement that you could provide to the ideas that they're bringing to the table. Obviously, reflect really carefully on what the person is saying. So as I said, just always repeat it back and say, I think what I'm hearing is this, just to make sure you're on the same page. And that's when you can really dig deep and craft a really creative and thoughtful response. You have to respect each team member's unique talents and skills. Everybody brings a different skill set to the table. Everybody contributes to your team in a different manner. And so celebrate those strengths, highlight them, recognize people. I think that's a really important piece of this is some people just don't feel recognized, and everybody likes to be recognized in a very different way. So figure out how your people like to be recognized. And sometimes it might just be in a one-on-one where you say, great job. I'm so proud of you. There are other people who love the show and love being the center of attention and use an opportunity in a team meeting or an all hands meeting or whatever appropriate for that particular type of celebration to recognize them in that manner. If you can hone in on how to celebrate people's wins, it will keep people feeling really engaged. Being open-minded, I think that goes without saying. You just have to be open-minded in order to be empathetic. And I think if you can do all of those, so being genuine, listening, respecting people, their talents and skills, staying open-minded, you're going to create a bond of respect and trust and understanding with your team that will keep them loyal to you forever. So even if they tend to leave your team to move on and up in their career, they will always come back to say, this person was the best leader I ever had. And it's because we innately want to feel connected. We innately want to feel supported, and we innately want to feel recognized by those who we either idolize or respect. And so if you can do that as a leader, it will go such a long way.
Great. Yeah, definitely the point around celebrating other people's achievements is a tough one, because I know, like, if you've got a really high performer in your team, everything you throw at them, they just get done. It's easy to expect that as the norm and therefore not give any praise because they're already at such a high bar, where someone that was underperforming, you go, oh, great job there, just purely because they've done something different to what they've previously done.
Exactly. You have to be equal in the way in which you recognize. And there are some people, and so find ways, even if you have people who don't perform on your team in a really effective way, find ways to celebrate their achievements just as much as your high performers. But also don't leave your high performers out. To your point, Glenn, sometimes they just get so much recognition that we think, ooh, I've kind of overdone it. If you can equalize it, you're going to have a very happy team, regardless of how they're performing.
Okay, great. And continuing on with this topic of how to put this into practice, one of the questions we got is, I would love to hear more about how to best introduce empathetic leadership into companies. What's been your experience at O'Reilly?
Mm-hmm. So we have manager excellence training that we're just about to roll out at O'Reilly, and empathetic leadership. So it's been a big thing since I came in. We haven't ever had a dedicated learning and development department internally. The irony of this is that we are, in some respects, a learning and development company when we think about how we teach other companies to be innovative and sharp with their tech skills and so on. We've done so many things right. But I think one population at O'Reilly that we've really missed on is our manager population in a couple of ways. I think there are people who have moved into management positions who realized very quickly, I'd much rather be an individual contributor. But the only way in which we have sort of created this path for people to advance was you go from an individual contributor to a manager. And sometimes your best people, in terms of best performers, don't want to be a manager. I think fondly back on my time in sales, where we had our highest performing individual contributors. They were bringing in millions and millions of dollars a year. And we moved two of those individuals into management positions, again, sort of same blind spot. And all they wanted to do was to make their team little mini them. So it was like, you must do it this way, you must say it this way. And it became paralyzing to the whole team. And at the end of the day, their teams tanked. They didn't bring in very much revenue at all. And the frustration on the manager and the frustration on the employees. And what it was is that those people probably didn't actually want to be people managers. They loved being at the top of the stack rankings. They loved bringing in the revenue. But for them, they felt like it was the only way to move up. So I'm going on a tangent here, but my point and where I'm going with this is that oftentimes managers tend to be the lost or sort of missed population. There's an assumption that everybody goes in and sort of knows what they're doing. And if they don't know what they're doing, they might get a little bit of training. But there's never any, in my opinion, there's never any time where you are the best manager you can be. I think it's an ever evolving role. And so when you focus on that population, really help that population think through, how do I build my own leadership philosophy? And how do I want to be as a manager? How do I want to show up for my employees every day? You're going to create a very, very rich environment for direct reports who want to work for the people who are managers. And you'll be able to suss out pretty quickly those who probably shouldn't be managers and should go back into a really high performing individual contributor role. So what we are doing is creating a manager excellence training program. That was something that we taught. Laura Baldwin, our president, and I talked about in my interview about a year ago, is saying that she said, I have this population of brilliant people. We just don't spend enough time in helping them think through their own management journey. And that was music to my ears, because I feel like that's what gets me out of bed every morning. So we actually have an empathetic leadership training course that we are going to roll out as part of this manager excellence training to really help leaders practice empathy in a very genuine, authentic, and vulnerable way. And it's not a 1 hour classroom style session and go back to your desks and you're done. It's going to be an ever evolving sort of phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 curriculum, where we can really help people not only learn how to do it theoretically, but then deploy it inside their daily lives as well. So I think it's number one, just focusing on building, awareness around why it's important to be empathetic, and then I think exemplifying it through your own actions. So if you are a senior leader at your organization, there's no better time than to start thinking about how you can show more empathy. I don't know that we can ever show too much empathy. And so leading by example, I think, is such an important piece to all of this. And then I think as you think about the ways in which managers at your organization are evaluated and deemed ready to be a manager, this should be part of your new manager training. This should be something that is an expectation that you set as managers to learn how to be empathetic, or to infuse empathy into whatever management style or leadership style they ultimately choose.
Sure. Yeah, I think most managers, at least initially, don't have any form of training. As you say, they're great individual contributors. They understand that part of the business, and then they have to now manage people so they can talk about their part of the business of what they need to do. But hopefully, that also gives them some empathy. So this actually ties into one of the questions. If we look for empathetic perspective, how important is the area or knowledge or expertise to actually lead them? So do you have to have done that job before to be able to put yourself in their shoes, for example, when you're trying to lead them?
I don't think you do. I really don't. Now, I don't think that you're going to find so many managers in roles who haven't already done some sort of aspect of the role that they are managing, because they tend to be promoted or hired into those positions based on their expertise in that particular subject matter area. But I personally do not think that an effective leader if they were coming in blind and as a blank slate and had no prior experience in their employees' shoes, I truly believe that a manager could learn very quickly if they did everything that we've talked about today: being authentic, listening, learning, being vulnerable. All of those pieces, number one, give employees an opportunity to say, hey, I have an opportunity to teach right now. And this is somebody who's ultimately influencing me and my career. I'm going to give it the best I've got. But you have to go into it with very open-minded, without judgment sort of way, and try to put yourself in their shoes. So if they say, I'm really challenged by this, instead of immediately thinking, well, it's because you don't do this, if it's the consequence of not, X happening because you didn't do Y. I think it's far more of okay, help me understand. And as you're thinking through it, it's, if I was in that person's shoes and I was faced with that same challenge, how would I put that in? How would I have handled the situation differently? And maybe you wouldn't. And that's okay. Because then you can go back to the employee and be like, I don't know that I would necessarily have done it differently myself, but let's think about a different way together now that we can make this change in order to help you come to a different outcome. The moment that an employee feels validated by somebody who is more senior than them to say, gosh, I think you did it the right way, it just didn't have the outcome we were looking for, it's amazing. Anybody's going to ride off into the sunset feeling really good that day because they didn't feel like they made a mistake. It's not whatever they have been tasked with is not providing or getting the output that you're ultimately looking for. So I think it's all of these aspects of empathy that you can drive in learning to become a manager, but I don't know that you necessarily need to have had the experience in order to help your team be really high performing.
I mean, well, Joe just mentioned like going into conversations without bias. I can think of a prime example I've recommended recently where someone says, right, the timesheets that I've told my team to do accurately are terrible. I look at what they're doing and something that should take 5 minutes, they've put 2 hours for. And, it's poor performance. I'm going to talk to him to try and solve this problem. And essentially being an empathetic leader, the idea is to just talk, why are you doing it this way? Instead of going in and saying, you're deliberately trying to annoy me here. Why is this the case? And then you'll find information that will actually be valuable to work out why this is an issue and how you can support them.
Yes. Or even one click deeper, the next time they need to fill out that time card, sit with them and say, can you just show me how you do this? First of all, I just need to understand, sort of the actions that you're taking. And let's see where we're getting this wrong. It doesn't have to be a tough conversation. And anybody, I think at that point should, and if it is somebody who is deliberately doing something, you're going to figure that out pretty quickly. But to go in without bias and to say, just teach me, show me what you are doing. I don't have any knowledge of this, or maybe you're doing it in a different way than I know of. Again, it equalizes, it diffuses any sort of friction or tension, and puts yourself in that person's shoes in that moment to really get to the crux of what the issue is.
Sure. Right then, so continuing down the same type of path, one of the questions is it possible to actually practice emotional empathy, or is our capacity for it a trait that people innately have or don't have, as opposed to cognitive empathy, which seems like something you can practice with things like active listening, being inquisitive?
Such an important point here. Emotional empathy is something that comes from within. So I think it's the true feeling that is drummed up because you have been through the same situation. So you can certainly practice it in the sense of if if you come across a situation in which you are working with a person through, and you have been in that situation and you feel an emotional response, show the emotional response. Be human in that moment. So many people fear, the crying or laughing hysterically because of something that happened that was just so embarrassing. I mean, I can tell you, the number of embarrassing stories that I've had in my life. And when I tell people and they turn purple in the face, I'm like, I can't believe that actually happened to me. And then they tell me something that makes them laugh hysterically. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's exactly what happened to me. There's nothing better than a good laugh right then, or a good cry. But I don't know that that's something that you can sort of overtly say, today I am going to practice emotional empathy. It's something that's going to come up unexpected. It's going to be drummed outside of you. And I think in that moment, if you feel comfortable and you want to be vulnerable, which I'm certainly encouraging you to be, show the emotion. It's going to create a connection with that human that you are working with that you didn't have before. And it's so important. Cognitive empathy is something that you can go in every day with to say, I'm going to practice this today. Compassionate empathy is what we're talking about in terms of leadership, is the blend of both of them. So being a compassionate, empathetic leader is somebody who every day sort of says, these are the things that I'm going to do. I'm going to try to put myself in people's shoes. I'm going to be vulnerable. I'm going to be open-minded without judgment, all those things. But they're also the people who allow themselves in those very vulnerable moments to be vulnerable, and to show the same emotion, and to create the connection that way.
Yeah, that's definitely an area of weakness for me, showing the emotion. I'm happy to talk about anything, but I don't show emotion in the workplace at all. And maybe that is hindering me a little bit from that perspective.
A lot of people don't, Glenn.
Yeah.
Really, I sit in a very unique position where I feel like I speak to a lot of people and they cry. I don't know if it's me or if it's just my job, but I get a lot of tears on the other side of the computer. And I'm a big hugger, and probably maybe not appropriate in every situation, but all I want to do is just reach through the computer and give them a big hug and say, I feel you. But what I am feeling in that moment is cognitive empathy. Now, there are moments that people have come to me in tears, and it has drummed up a very, very sort of visceral response to something that I have been through, where I start to cry myself. There was a moment yesterday, actually, where I was on the phone with a mom at O'Reilly who felt like she was just struggling with the balance. She was like, I'm not coming to you for any reason other than the fact that I just feel like I need to talk to I'm a mother of two fairly young children. And she's like, I just need to talk to somebody who maybe has mastered it. And she burst into tears, and I had this emotional response. I burst into tears, and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing at any moment of the day. I feel like it's a disaster waiting to happen, because if I don't have everything itinerarized, but in that moment, I was showing emotional empathy, where she's coming to me saying, I don't know if I can do this. I don't feel the balance. And quite frankly, and I said to her, I don't feel it either. And she and I don't work on a daily basis together. It was the first time I had ever spoken with her. I felt so happy that she had come to me in that vulnerable way. We now have a connection, because she realizes that the things that she is feeling are the things that I am feeling, and we can share those emotions. And so every time she's feeling like she's struggling, she can come to me. And I probably now know that anytime I feel like I'm struggling and I've had a bad day with trying to balance the work, career and job career and being a mom and all of the other things that are going on in my life, she's an outlet for me too. And I think that's just a perfect example of emotional empathy in that moment, where I allowed myself to be vulnerable.
Yeah. And in my case, if that situation came to me, it would be like, how do I solve this problem? Which is obviously not the same approach as what we're going with there. And I think what's interesting as well is, as a way of still trying to stay on the original question of how do you practice this, for those in the CTO Craft community, there's Agile Conversations with our own Squirrel. They've released a book where you actually practice conversations. You say what you want to say, and you write what you think their response is going to be, and then you can assess it to work out, are you actually still being judgmental, or are you actually trying to be inquisitive and actually look at, understand what they're actually feeling or what their problem is, to actually gain more from that conversation. So I think that's a really good approach to consider as well. Obviously, it doesn't go down the emotion side as much as this.
No, I can't. Actually, it's so funny that you say this, because when I think about putting empathy into practice, I think the first is that you have to put aside your own viewpoints. You just have to, our experiences and our beliefs influence how we perceive people and situations. And oftentimes our experience is so limited that we come in with this very sort of narrow perception of the person who is coming to us in a manner in which they are. And so if you were to go in with your own viewpoint, you're not allowing that person to be their whole self, and you're also putting your own lived experiences into that, and that's not empathy. That's quite frankly judgment. You have to use your imagination. So, there are when people share with you, I was going to say there are experiences that people are going to share with you that might make you feel uncomfortable, or might be things that you're like, I just can't relate with that or to that. But try to imagine what it's like to be them in that moment. Use the images that they're talking about in your mind to craft your thoughtful response, their emotions, the circumstances, and really try to place yourself in that moment. And I think using your imagination, even if you feel like I can't relate, I'm having a really hard time, the more you can start to think like, how would I react in this situation, the better off you're going to be. We've talked about listening. I can't say it enough. Be curious. I think it's really important to ask a lot of questions and try to understand that person's perspective, so that then you can put aside your viewpoints and you can use your imagination. But the more information you can gain from somebody, the better. But this is my favorite. Try not to fix. And that's exactly what you just said, Glenn. And that in those moments, you just want to solve, you want to help, you want to, and sometimes people aren't always looking for solutions. Sometimes if you just listen and you're curious and you ask them a lot of questions, they come to the solution themselves. But the moment that you try to move into the fixer, you're implementing your own judgment, you're implementing your own way, you're not being very empathetic, and you're not putting yourself in their shoes because you're coming at it from your own viewpoint. And so the most important thing in all of this is don't always be a fixer. You don't always have to do it. You don't always have to have the solution, and building it together is more powerful.
Sure. Definitely an area I need to pay attention to.
I didn't need to call you out specifically. Just when you said that, I was like, oh, absolutely. So
I'm sure I'm not the only one as well. Okay, cool. One of the other interesting questions, a lot of elements of empathetic leadership resonate with me as a coaching leadership style. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on the overlap versus differences of this?
So yes, absolutely. I think coaching, there's a level of empathy that needs to go into any coaching, partly because when you are either coaching somebody one-on-one or you're coaching, a group of individuals, there are varying levels of experiences that they bring to the table. There are experiences that you don't even know that they've had that will play into the way that you might tailor the coaching that you're giving to them, all of these pieces. So certainly there's an empathetic component to it. But I think coaching is a little bit different, in that you're essentially trying to enable somebody, you're helping them develop skills that are going to enable them to be more effective in whatever capacity they're being coached in. And so I almost think they go in hand, but empathy should play a small part of that, whereas coaching really should hone in on very specific, fixable traits. Fixable might be the wrong word. Changeable, areas in which somebody needs to go from here to there in order to grow and develop. It should be done with empathy, but sometimes you just need to tell them, like, this is how you get it done. I'm coaching you, and this is the experience that I have had, and I have been successful in that. Now, you want to know what the experience they have that brings to the table to see whether that might work. But oftentimes they almost have to show empathy on their side, to put themselves in your shoes, to then be able to move forward in that coaching relationship effectively. So I think there is a big difference there, but empathy in general sort of tends to be this overarching umbrella. Coaching is a little bit more of being a fixer and a solver and helping people, again, become more effective.
Sure. Great. And actually, one of the questions is actually something similar from the start. So I'm not sure if you missed it or whether there's actually more to this aspect or not. Is there any occasion where being an empathetic leader is bad for team or an individual performance or for some other negative effects? Someone's actually commented on there. Personally, I've had negative effects because my peers saw my empathy as a weakness. I did not know how to actually solve this. So my resolution was to move on and find a place where my empathy is actually well received. So would you say it's a cultural issue inside an organization, or would you put it down to something else?
It saddens me to think that there were a group of peers that saw empathy as a bad thing. And I would hope that in that moment, they could have been taught empathy to understand the stance in which, you were coming from, and whoever wrote this question. I don't know that empathy is ever a bad thing. As I said, it can't be soft. So the moment that it becomes a reason for you to allow performance to dip, or to allow more time out of the office than probably necessary, or just feeling like your team is walking all over you, I think you've got empathy wrong. Empathy is a way, like I said, still be a strong leader, still drive performance, still help your team rally around change, all of the things that go into leadership. But that layer of empathy just makes you more of a human being, less of a robot. And in turn, your team will be more productive and more innovative and more engaged. In the situation, I think that I'm hearing here is that there was maybe there was an over indexing on being empathetic, but empathetic really just maybe didn't handle the situation in a disciplined enough way that had the right outcome. And so it didn't work in your favor. And I think you have to find that balance where there are moments where, if you are terminating somebody for cause, if they've done something bad, you can be a human during that conversation, but they also have to understand that they did something wrong. So you don't have to sit there and cry and say, I've been through this before myself, and show your emotional empathy. Like, at some point you just kind of have to shut that off and handle the situation. And so I think it's trying to find that balance as a leader. But I'm really sorry that you went through that experience and feeling like you had to move on because you showed such an important emotion. Because if you can continue to show it, and I encourage you to do that, you're going to be an example. You will continue to be an exemplary leader. I'm sure you are now. And those who might not have seen it as a strength probably won't be. And so, only time will tell. But I'm proud of you for bringing that up. Thank you. And I think that's a really tough situation. But maybe just don't over-index in really, really tough situations on empathy, because you do have to, again, try to walk that line and go for the outcome that you're looking for in that situation. So,
sure. Okay, great. And just to round everything off then, any recommended resources people should be reading, watching to obviously help them continue to improve after this fireside chat?
Yes. Oh my gosh. Now the author has, give me 1 second. I'm going to tell you there's a book that I read very early on in my, Dare to Be Brave by Brene Brown is amazing. It's a really, really wonderful book that sort of teaches leadership in a brave manner, but the braveness comes from being vulnerable. And so I read that very, very early on in my management career, and cannot tell you how good it was for it to sort of set this table for, this is how I think I want to be a leader. This is how I want to be perceived. But there is a book that I was recently reading called Empathetic Leadership, go figure, by Michael Brisciana. It's Brisciana. And it's actually 47 practical tips for leading with kindness and compassion and empathy. And they're such tangible tips. I've been listening to it in an audiobook, and I listen to it when I'm picking the kids up from school or kind of driving around running errands. And it's every day I'm like, oh, I could do that. That's an easy thing to do. And so it's constantly in my mind. I highly recommend that. And Google's your best friend. You can type in empathetic leadership and you will get novels and novels and novels. I think you just have to figure out which one speaks to you best. But the Dare to Lead, and it was Dare to Lead by Brene Brown, and and Empathetic Leadership are two resources I highly recommend. So
great. The Dare to Lead's been on my to-read list for, I think, several years now. I still haven't got round to it off my other list, but I definitely should be prioritising that up my my reading list. Excellent. So thanks for talking today, Jeannie. I'm sure the audience has got great value out of this conversation. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me, everybody. I am available. I think CTO Craft is going to send out my contact information. I would love to hear from every single one of you and have a conversation if that feels necessary and appropriate for you. But your empathetic leadership journey, if it hasn't already started, can start today. And I'd love to be a part of that. So feel free to reach out. And again, thanks for giving me your time this morning or afternoon.
Great. And yes, you can connect with Jeannie after the event via the link I've just shared. The LinkedIn's on the message board. Thank you all for joining. Next week, we're joining Fabio Oliveira, who's the Managing Director at YLD for Fireside Chat. He'll discuss a CTO's perspective on mitigating risk while building innovation to the company. He'll be emphasising the importance of setting boundaries for innovation and working within them while still fostering a culture of risk-taking and open communication. That's a big topic. The discussion will also walk through some strategies for managing risk and technological innovation, such as investing in solutions that reduce risk and balancing the potential benefits of innovation against those risks. Finally, he will also explore how possessing high-performing cross-functional teams can effectively approach risk management in innovation. The event page is also in the chat, so feel free to register for that for next week. Thank you all for being here, and thanks again for your time, Jeannie.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.